Turning Point Services.
Caroline Pace. I'm Tracy Pruitt.
Ronnie Wright.
Darren Staley, Life Alliance.
Roger Giles, Home Care Management.
Oh, they fixed that camera.
Okay, that's everyone in Boone. Who do we have in Lenore?
This is John Fraser with Smoky.
Hi, Mary Short and my daughter Katie.
I'm Mark Bridges from Smoky. I'm a care coordinator.
Susan Thompson from Psyche, Care Coordinator.
That's all of us.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. That was appropriate.
And who do we have in Silva?
I think she recognizes Jesse's voice.
Yeah. By now she should have,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kathy Dills, Registry Coordinator.
Jennifer Fleming, I'm a parent. This is my son Kyle.
Paige Lee, IDD Care Coordinator. Jody Miller, Family Support Network or Region.
That's sweet. He's got his hand over.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Wait a minute, we got two. Can you do that again, Wanda? Sorry. Hang on, Jesse. Go ahead. Do it again. Okay. I'm Beverly Gaddis, making citizens.
Okay, thank you. Let's see, and here in Asheville, we'll start to my right.
Diane Dalton, Skill Creations. Sonia Pitts, Open Hearts Art Center. Wanda Steele, Reach for Independence. Gary Anchor, parent.
Jane Lindsay, CFAC member and guardian of an IDD young lady.
Cindy Davidson. Nancy Baker, CFAC, parent of an IDD. Janet Price Farrell, parent and executive director of FIRST.
John Broxman, GT Independence.
Price Story, Storybook Farm, and parent. Natalie Summerskill with Summerlin Homes. Nanette Kirkland with Summerlin Homes. Tracy Hayes, Smoky General Counsel. Lindy Montleone, IDD Care Coordination.
Kathy Ryder, parent.
Caitlin Celery, Independence.
Tina Clark, IDD Care Coordination. Lynn English with Smoky. Suzette Logan, IDD Care Coordination.
That's everyone. Okay. In your package, you have our agenda. Would anyone like to add something to the agenda? The Q&A, please, at the end if necessary. You will also get a Q&A after the presentation. Anything else? Okay, also in your packets are the notes from the last meeting. The last meeting, James Cuellar presented information about Cap City, and there was quite a bit of discussion. No new action items were identified, and one of the action items from the previous month's meetings was to have Tracy come and present about the Cardinal Settlement, and she is on the agenda. Anyone note any errors in the minutes?
Second.
All right. We'll approve the minutes and move on. The first item on the agenda is about membership. And you all saw and most of you, I guess, I think everyone in this room saw the idea about notifying us if you're planning on continuing to participate in this meeting. And I've received feedback from several folks saying that they wanted to remain on the committee and start voting and making recommendations. And I've also received some notices from folks that said they did not want to be a voting member. They just wanted to come as information was provided. And we'll give a little bit longer for folks to provide feedback, and by the next meeting we should have a set committee because there may be some changes with regard to the structure and the way this is handled as we move forward this fiscal year, because there's going to be a lot happening in the IDD world with implementation of the new waiver, home and community-based service standards, resource allocation, and all those pieces. So this group will start hopefully giving us some guidance with regard to where we're going as Smoky. Any questions about the membership fees? Let me plug in this PowerPoint, and I'll turn it over to Tracy. Mark it up.
I don't know.
You want to employ this, or you want to do it?
The easiest thing.
Okay, girl. I'm sorry, Katie. You had to come.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for inviting me. I apologize to any CFAC members because some of this is going to be similar to the presentation. So Nancy, you've probably gotten it 3 times now. It's been presented to the CFAC, it's been presented to the board, but I understand that you all wanted some more information about the Cardinal Settlement, so that is what I'm here to talk about.
Well, why isn't this on your website?
Some little background.
If you've done it so many times.
Either LS versus Bosch or KC versus Bosch, which was the secretary who was in office at the time the lawsuit was finalized. These lawsuits, the way they work, they always name the secretary, so you'll see sometimes the names of the lawsuits change over time. They'll start out as maybe Chancellor and end up as Bosch. I've seen some have gone through 3 or 4 secretaries before they finally get resolved. So this was a class action lawsuit that was brought by Disability Rights of North Carolina, the Legal Services of the Southern Piedmont, which is a legal aid organization operating out of Charlotte, and the National Health Law Program. This was in federal court against the Department of Health and Human Services and Cardinal Innovations Healthcare Solutions. And the plaintiffs in that case were parents or guardians of Innovations waiver participants. The participants are identified only by initial. And the plaintiffs were arguing that DHHS and Cardinal had violated their rights under the Medicaid statute, under the Social Security Act, and under the Due Process Clause of the United States Constitution by reducing Innovations waiver services without the opportunity for notice and a hearing. That was essentially their argument. So, what I like to start out with, and I do a lot of presentations and have done for a number of years, so my background, for those of you who don't know, I worked at the Attorney General's office for a number of years before I came to work for Smoky, and I represented DMA and DMH at the AG's office. So I've done a lot of presentations on due process. I hate to say it, but due process and HIPAA are like my skills, which is not necessarily a great thing, but it's true fact. So one of the things I always like to start out with is this quote, which is from a court case. It's getting a little old now, but it's still one of my favorite quotes from back in 1976, where a judge wrote that the Medicaid statute, as is true of other parts of the Social Security Act, is an aggravated assault on the English language. Truer words were never spoken, right? Yep. Resistant to attempts to understand it. The statute is complicated and murky, not only difficult to administer and interpret, but a poor example to those who would like to use plain and simple expressions. And it really is very true. And that was in 1976, before they had made 18 million changes that had been made to the Social Security Act, none of which made it any clearer. And so I always start with that quote to remind people that Medicaid is hard. Medicaid is not black and white. I was at the General Assembly one day, back when I represented DMA, arguing with a research person who worked for one of the senators, and we were arguing back and forth about Medicaid, and he finally just got frustrated, and he said, well, Tracy, Medicaid just needs to be black and white. And I said to him, well, I'm sorry to tell you, sir, but Medicaid is not black and white. It is all different shades of gray. And it's not a simple matter of Cardinal was wrong or DHHS was wrong or the plaintiffs were right. It's just much more complicated than that. So there have been a number of other class actions against DHHS. The two that you all may be most familiar with, how many of you, does anybody remember the McCartney case? McCartney versus Counselor? Yeah. So I represented DMA on that case, so I'm very familiar with it. This was allegations that value options at the time, who were responsible for making utilization management decisions about behavioral health services, that they were engaging in discouragement and that they were violating due process. And we settled that case. It's a very similar settlement to the settlement that's been entered into here. A big part of that settlement was about training. It was about going around and doing training for providers and for staff and for the people who worked for value options. So I actually traveled around the state with a couple of other people, and we did about 8 different trainings all over the state on due process, what people's rights are, what Medicaid beneficiaries' rights are under the Medicaid Act, and to remind providers of what their responsibilities are to help consumers and families navigate the appeal process and the authorization process. Another big class action some of you may have heard of is Pashby versus WASP. This was when DHHS made cuts to personal care services a couple of years ago, and advocates argued that this violated the Americans with Disabilities Act. So these types of class actions are very common, and they're not unique to North Carolina. They happen all over the country. So it's very common for Medicaid programs across the nation. So the lawsuit was filed. Cardinal's attorneys, DHHS's attorneys, they all sat in a room for many, many months to try and work out a settlement. And in the end, the settlement they came up with, again, is very similar to the McCartney settlement. DHHS ultimately is responsible. So even though they have a contract with Cardinal, just like they have a contract with us, they are ultimately responsible under the Social Security Act for ensuring that due process rights are respected and that services are delivered appropriately. So they were required under the settlement, they agreed to clarify the due process rights for all North Carolina Innovations waiver participants. And just to kind of be clear, so this particular class action was specific to the Innovations waiver. It did not address any other services under the combined 1915 BC waiver. It was very limited to Innovations. So the biggest piece of it was about LME MCO training. So the department was required under the settlement to conduct training for all of the LME MCOs, just to clarify that all of the LME MCOs are appropriately following and adhering to due process requirements. It involved a lot of discussion around discouragement, around SITS evaluation requirements, and around how the ISP is developed. One of the things I will tell you, so when I got to Smoky, because this was my background, this is one of the first things that I did, was to go out and meet with our utilization management staff and conduct a training on due process and EPSDT. So at the time the settlement was announced, I felt pretty confident that our staff were already doing everything that they needed to do. The way we handled it was that I attended the state's training, and then I set up, I'm trying to remember, we rented space, I think. We rented, I forget, somewhere, some large space, and we had all of Smoky's care coordination staff, UM staff, customer service staff, community collaboration staff, all of our staff who actually interact on a daily basis with consumers and families were required to attend this training. I think I offered it 4 times. To make sure that we were covering all staff, and we went through all of these principles around discouragement, around due process, and just in general around the authorization process and the appeal process. The other thing the settlement required is that the department remove any incorrect information from their website and make sure that all of the LME MCOs remove anything that was incorrect from their website. I think it's kind of funny, but the only thing we had to remove from our website were documents that had been created by DHHS that they had asked us to put on the website. So those were the only documents that they specifically asked us to remove from Smoky's website. So we didn't have anything up there that was, deliberately inaccurate or anything like that. We just had to take off some DHHS documents. They're also working, this is a piece of the settlement that's not quite concluded. The notifications that go out to consumers and families, we use a template that comes to us from the state, and they are still working on finalizing those templates. But Smoky is using the current template that has been approved by the HHS. It also required Cardinal and DHHS to pay attorney's fees to Disability Rights, Legal Services of Southern Piedmont, and the National Health Law Program. And again, that's also not unusual. We had to pay attorney's fees in the McCartney case as well. But what I like to say, and the way I presented at our staff meeting, and to CFAC, I let people kind of guess how much do you think. So Cardinal had to pay attorney's fees, but Cardinal also had to hire outside counsel to handle this case for them. How much do you think Cardinal probably spent on that?
Half on their part or the other part?
Either or both. Okay. Needs to spend money. I would say a conservative estimate would be they spent $1 million on their own legal fees, and then they had to pay several $100,000 in legal fees to the plaintiffs. So what I like to say is that's not where I would like to see Smoky's dollars going. That's not where we want to spend our dollars. We have a very small litigation budget, and we have no desire to have to expand that and take away money that could be used for services. And so this is why it's so important for our Smoky staff to really understand
It's
the
not the
requirements
same
and
money.
adhere to them. Does that mean we're going to have 100% for perfection? It is not. But what it means is that everybody's been appropriately trained, and if a staff person is engaging in behavior that they shouldn't, that it will be caught, and that they will be appropriately disciplined and given the supervisory coaching that they need, so that they are not violating any of these requirements. So, any questions before I go on?
How do they find the dollars? How many Cardinal on that kind of money?
Well, Cardinal has
Oh, a big thing.
Thank you. So, I'm
She's lying.
not
Well, she's lying.
We're not able to take money out of services for them.
No, right. They're large.
Correct.
Add administrative service.
So in any event, I kind of like to make sure everybody understands what is due process before we move on
To
and talk
imply
about due process. So due process,
that money is spent on litigation, so it can't go to services.
The constitutional requirement that whenever the government is going to take away
I'm
your
getting it
right
on
to
tape
your
so I can
property,
forward it to other
you have
individuals.
notice and the opportunity for a hearing before that occurs. So you think of it in the criminal context, right? You have a right to know what the charges are against you and to have a trial before your liberty is taken away from you and you are incarcerated. In terms of the property, in this particular context, the United States Supreme Court, in a case called Goldberg versus Kelly, said that entitlement benefits such as food stamps or Medicaid is a property interest that cannot be taken away without notice and the opportunity for a hearing. And it stems from a New York case where New York had across the board taken away some food stamp benefits, and it went all the way up to the Supreme Court, and they said, no, you can't do that unless you have provided a written notice to people and given them an opportunity to challenge it. So why is it important? It's a constitutional entitlement, first of all. Now this is Medicaid only, and I always like to emphasize that. I mean, we are talking about the Innovations waiver, so that's Medicaid, but a lot of times people think that it applies to state-funded services, and it does not. State-funded services are not an entitlement the way Medicaid is an entitlement. It's the law. In North Carolina, we have North Carolina General Statute, Chapter 108D, which is the section that governs appeals by managed care organizations such as Smoky. And this was worked out over several years, and I was involved in the development of that legislation, and I think it's been designed to mirror the federal regulations, which are found at 42 CFR 438. So it's the law, it's in the Constitution. It's the other thing I always like to say, and I really believe this, it is the right thing to do. It is in line with Smoky's mission, vision, and values. We are not going to take away someone's services without following due process rights. So when does it apply? It doesn't apply for every single thing, right? That's why we have grievances and why we have actions. They're different. So it applies whenever Smoky takes an action. An action is a very specifically defined term. There have been recent proposed changes to the federal regulations
And they're gonna change action to, I think, adverse benefit determination, because it's important that we make it longer. So, but it doesn't actually change what the definition is. So what is an action? For the purposes, for really what this group needs to know, these are the three main categories of actions that occur at Smoky. It's the denial in whole or in part of a service authorization request. And that's when the ISP is submitted, it is treated as a service authorization request. And so any denial in whole or in part of that is considered an action. The reduction, suspension, or termination of a previously authorized service is another action. And if we fail to issue a decision on a service authorization or request in 14 calendar days, that's also considered an action. So we have 14 days to make decisions. So the request for authorization of services in the plan of care must reflect the desires of the individual, including the type, amount, and duration of services. And the time frames are set out again in the CFR, which stands for Code of Federal Regulations. So for a standard authorization request, we have 14 calendar days, and for an expedited authorization request, we have 3 working days. So these are some of the topics that were covered by the Cardinal Settlement. I'm going to go through them pretty quickly, but a big one had to do with the SIS, which I understand, correct me if I'm wrong, Lindy, supports intensity scale, right? Supports intensity scale, which is replacing the SNAP, correct? Did I get that one right? Okay.
I think all the other initials you know.
I know the legal ones. Okay. So one of the things that the Cardinal Settlement and the training from the state clarified was that whenever a participant is notified of the results of a new SIS evaluation, the participant or the participant's legally responsible person must be informed in writing of the opportunity and process for raising concerns with the SIS evaluation. So for example, last week, letters began to go out to parents of children under 16 who are on the Innovations waiver. Did anybody in this room or on the call receive one of those letters? Anybody get one of those? So these were just notifying people. You got one of them. Okay. These were notifying families that SIS evaluations are going to be scheduled over the next couple of months. AAIDD is coming to do the child SIS evaluations that are going to be required. And it's letting them know that once that evaluation is done, there will be the process and the opportunity to raise concerns if a parent or guardian has any concerns about the results of the SIS evaluation of the score.
I have a question.
That next bullet there is the most important thing that came out of the Cardinal
Tracy?
Tracy, we have a question in Lenore. We've got a question in Lenore. Tracy, I'm sorry to interrupt.
Hi, Tracy. This is Mary Short. I have a question about the SIS and the notification and being informed of the results of the SIS. How and when are the participants notified of the SIS verification committee and the SIS verification committee findings?
That I'm not sure I could answer. I would have to probably talk to someone in our utilization management department. So let me get back to it, and I'll give Jesse an answer so that he can present that at your next meeting.
Well, I'm just not sure that most folks are aware that there is a SIS verification process to begin with.
Is there anybody from UM who wants to speak to the SIS verification process? Lindy?
Hello? There are 4 questions at the end of the supports intensity scale. They're really not part of the supports intensity scale, but they're questions that are asked at the end of each evaluation or assessment. And if one of those questions is answered with a yes, it triggers a verification review.
Let me know if you need that.
Which that's when we try to ensure that health and safety is met based on that issue that's indicated. I haven't looked at one in the bid, so I'm just giving a brief overview. And a committee of people look at the record for the individual and take into consideration whether or not the record the documentation supports the answer of yes to one of those 4 questions. That's the purpose of the SIS verification.
So this second bullet point here, again, this is probably the most important thing that came out of the Cardinal Settlement, and this was probably the biggest area of disagreement. So is everybody in the room fairly familiar with resource allocation and how that is going to be rolled out in the proposal for resource allocation and the revisions in the amendment to the waiver? And this is where the SIS score is used to, for lack of a better term, I guess, put participants in different categories based on level of need. And the way Cardinal had approached that is they were approaching it as if the SIS score was a sort of binding guideline. And so the department, because of this litigation, is clarifying that the results of the SIS are guidelines and they are not a binding limit for the individual budget or the amount of services that can be requested or authorized. So that's the most important thing for all of you to know, that the results of the SIS score are not a binding requirement for the services that you want to request, the services that can be requested or authorized, or for the individual budget amount.
What other avenues are looked at?
I'm sorry?
What other avenues other than the SIS are looked at? It's not binding.
The SIS is not binding, but it is going to be used as a guideline. So in terms of other avenues, it would depend on what's in the record for the individual participant in terms of what other kinds of evaluations, diagnostic criteria are out there, all of that stuff. So it's going to be looking at, basically saying you have to look at the whole picture. You can't just look at
I've asked for an ICF.
And we also can't limit what you ask to your SIS score.
Right.
That's why I asked.
So again, you'll have an opportunity to discuss the SIS evaluation results with Smoky. And you will be notified of the potential for the results to be adjusted if a particular support need of the individual was not accurately captured. And again, so you remember the way the SIS process works, for those of you who have or have not gone through that, people who are close to the participant and who know the most about the participant are supposed to be invited to participate in the SIS evaluation, so that it's all the people who have the most knowledge and information about the participant. Now, you cannot file an appeal of the SIS score. You can't file an appeal that says, I disagree with the SIS score and I want to appeal. That was another thing that came out of the settlement. They clarified, no, that's not something you can appeal because it's not an action, but you can file a grievance. And so if you don't know how to file a grievance, we have many avenues for doing that, but you can call customer services at Smoky and they can walk you through that process. So the other big piece, we had the SIS evaluation piece. The other big piece of the Cardinal Settlement had to do with discouragement. And this was a big part of the McCartney Settlement years ago as well. This was, there was a belief that Value Options employees would be on the phone with providers or with consumers and families and would discourage them from asking for services or for filing appeals. And so one of the things that we did as part of the McCartney Settlement was we actually wrote a script for Value Options, which many of you probably heard when you called them, and you wonder why they sounded so robotic, and it was because they had been told, this is the script you have to use. And we actually monitored it because all of their calls were recorded, and we did a sampling of like 5% of their calls every month to check that they were following the script. We'd like to avoid using a script here at Smoky because we don't think it's particularly consumer friendly, but I kind of hold it over the head of everyone and say, you know, if I find out that people are engaging in discouragement, that's what we'll have to go to, is a script. So this is sort of Smoky's general policy, and this was our policy long before the Cardinal Settlement. But no Smoky employee will attempt to influence, limit, or interfere with a participant's right or decision to file a grievance, a reconsideration request with Smoky, or a state fair hearing appeal with the Office of Administrative Hearings. Okay? Everyone has the right to do that. Whether we agree or disagree, that is not the point. It's not about people's personal opinions. Every participant on the Innovations Waiver has the right to do that. So in terms of development of the individual support plan, And this was some of the pieces that came out of the Cardinal Settlement. It meets, and again, this was all stuff that we had already advised Smoky staff, but we were just reiterating as part of this settlement. So no Smoky staff person, a care coordinator who's responsible for developing the annual plan of care, they should never ask a participant to sign a blank plan of care. And I'm not saying it's happened at Smoky, but I know that it has happened out there in the world where somebody said, hey, if you just sign this blank one, I'll take it back to the office and fill it in. Well, that's not a very individualized plan of care, is it? Can't sign a blank one or an incomplete one. And no participant or family member should be instructed to sign a plan of care that they do not agree with. Now, even if the care coordinator doesn't agree with it, even if we know that under the innovations waiver there's a limit and the services are not going to be approved, the family member, the participant, has the right to request those services and to get their formal appeal rights.
There always be a meeting for that care.
What?
Always be a meeting for a plan of care. That's not a requirement to have a meeting for a plan of care, but it's best practice. So, yeah, I would say yes. Meetings for plan of care. I'm looking at Linda again.
How you would develop one without a meeting.
Yeah, that would be kind of hard.
How would you come up with a plan? I mean, there wasn't any, if you didn't meet with the care coordinator.
And get it signed and all of that. So I'm not sure how that would work.
I think the definition of meeting is a little broad for some, or not broad.
Gotcha. So what we can do though, staff can inform the participant that you have to have a signed plan of care in order to receive services. We had a couple of situations right after the new waiver went live, where people just said, well, I'm just not going to sign the plan of care. And then that way I can keep all the services I've had under CAP and RDD and I never have to switch. And DHHS said, no, that's not going to work. You have to sign the plan. And it is okay, it is acceptable for Smoky's care coordinator to say, no, you have to sign a plan. It doesn't necessarily have to be the plan the care coordinator prepared, but you have to sign a plan to get that through the process. You can't just not sign. Yes.
So help me with that, because you're saying that if they don't sign, they're not getting services. If they do sign, they're agreeing to the plan, and they don't.
No, they should never sign a plan they don't agree with. They can write one they do agree with, or they can write into the plan that's been prepared by the care coordinator, I disagree with this, these are the services I want.
And that's so nice.
Okay. There's a spot for it. So you should never, staff are told they can never discourage a participant from requesting a specific service or an appeal. They can never intentionally provide material misinformation to a participant that might discourage service requests, appeals, or reporting of violations of the Cardinal Settlement Agreement. But, and this is a big but, and this was part of why we don't want to have a script. We do want staff to feel free to offer alternative services if appropriate, to engage in clinical and treatment discussions with consumers and family members, to explain that, if you request this, it's likely to be denied. We can tell you that, and you still have the right to make the request, but we can still tell you, these are the limits under the innovations waiver, and so if you ask for this, you're probably not going to get it, but you can, if that's what you wish, we will put that request through, and we can explain the appeal process. So I don't want people to think that just because there is no discouragement that care coordinators shouldn't be having educational discussions, because they should. That's what we want them to do. Once all that happens and the request goes through, if a request is denied, reduced, or terminated, or authorized for a duration less than requested, a written notice with appeal rights must be issued unless, and this is a big unless, this is another thing that came from DHHS, unless the requested service was authorized up to the maximum benefit for an adult. So if you're getting the maximum benefit, so I'm going to kind of step outside of innovations because it's an easier example for me, but if you're getting intensive in-home at a certain number of units, which is the maximum allowed under the policy, and you ask for more than that, and we approve the maximum, you're not going to get a notice with appeal rights because we've approved the maximum that's allowed under the clinical coverage policy.
I have a question.
Yes.
Should other services be offered, and if you're at the maximum, should other services be offered to replace what was denied, even though you're at the maximum?
It can be, but it's not required to be.
If you're at the maximum hours, and you're not gonna get approved anymore.
If you're at the maximum hours total, yeah, I think we'd have to kind of talk more specifically about which service for me to be able to answer that.
Because you could get a maximum service,
but there could be other
maximum
services.
budget.
Exactly. Are you talking about the budget, or are you talking about
Max hours.
max hours?
So we can talk about no such thing as max hours.
Yeah, not under the waiver.
I mean, just
Well,
like,
yeah, it's 84, it's 84 hours, regardless of what hours money you spend, you'll never get more than 84 hours.
of any combination of
Of
services.
any combination of services, there is the, what's it called, intensive, in-home intensive, thank you. So there are other ways, so I don't want to give the impression that, no, it's a hard limit. But yes, in general, 84 hours, that's what you're gonna get, that's the maximum, and in no event can you go above the budget. And the reason for that is, the waiver is in and of itself an accommodation under the ADA. Basically, CMS has looked at it and said, okay, we think that these people can be more appropriately and cheaply served in the community up to this amount of money. And if it costs more than that to serve them in the home and community of their choice, then it's actually cheaper for us to have them in an institution. That's the number at which CMS said, if it's more than that, then institutional level of care is more appropriate. And under that, it's more efficient and more appropriate for them to be served in the home and community of their choice. So that's kind of where that number comes from.
But when the state applies for like the new waiver that they're getting now, they put the amount.
They do.
Put the limit. Not CMS, the state.
That's correct.
Puts the limit.
The state
So
puts
the
the
state
limit
can
in.
put more than what they've got. Because that's truly not the cost of all institutions, and I know.
But saying yes, are they going to? Probably not. But again, CMS has to approve it and has to agree that that is the correct number. And so they have. And so that's why you can't go above the budget, even under EPSDT or even through some sort of appeal process. You're never going to be able to go above that budget. That budget is a hard limit. Now, that's different from the individual budget amount under resource allocation. Am I going to confuse people if I talk about that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So when the resource allocation model rules out, there will be individual budget amounts recommended for the particular participant that may be much less than the total max innovation range. Exactly. It's going to be a range. And so you can go above the individual budget amount. You can never go above the maximum innovations waiver budget. I'm starting to get outside my area of expertise here, so so far so good. Okay. And then in general, when I do this, I like to make sure everybody understands the appeal process. So first, there's a reconsideration process here at Smoky. It's internal. So if we have issued that notice and denied a service, the first thing you have to do is go through our reconsideration process. You cannot just go directly to OAH. And that is a change from pre-waiver, okay? Pre-waiver, you could just file an appeal directly with OAH. You cannot do that anymore. They will send it back. And the problem is, by the time they send it back, you will probably have missed the time frame to file. So you want to always make sure that if you're going to file a reconsideration, you do it with us first. All of the notices that we send include a form to file. It's already there. It's got the fax number. You can file it electronically. You can bring it in person to any of our offices. We try to make it as easy as possible to file the appeal, and we will provide assistance if a family member or a participant needs assistance in filing the appeal. That's one of our responsibilities under the waiver. You can request an appeal orally. You have to follow it up with something in writing within those 30 days. But you can call on the phone and say, I want to appeal. And then we have to immediately begin helping you get that documentation in. And so far, with all the oral appeals that we have had at Smoky, there's only been one case where we were unable to get a signed form in. And this is out of many hundreds of appeals that we have received. Again, you have to appeal to Smoky first. It goes through peer review here at Smoky. You get a written decision, and if the written decision continues to uphold Smoky's decision, then you have the right to appeal to OAH.
I have another question.
And OAH stands for the Office of Administrative Hearings. It's an administrative hearing body that's based in Raleigh. They will come and do in-person hearings throughout the state if you request, but most of the hearings at OAH are done by telephone. Like 99.9% of them are done by telephone.
Tracy, we've got another question. Got another question here, Tracy.
Tracy, this is Mary Short again. Under the reconsideration process overview, isn't the participant able to present new evidence?
Absolutely. At any point in the process, participants, consumers, families, providers can present new evidence, and Smoky will consider it. That is at any point in the reconsideration process, at any point in the OAH appeal process. That actually was something that came out of the McCartney settlement several years ago. That was some clarification that came out of that case. So that was a good question. Thank you.
You're welcome.
The first thing that's going to happen if you go to OAH is they're going to offer you the opportunity to mediate. You are not required to do that. I would encourage people to take advantage of mediation. It's a neutral body. It's the Mediation Network of North Carolina. They are not a part of DHHS. They're not a part of OAH. They're independent mediators that have a contract to do this. And they have developed a lot of skill and expertise in these over the past few years since they began doing them. Now, it's not a settlement the way you think of a settlement of so let's say you were in a car accident and you sued the other person and you wanted $100,000 and they only wanted to give you $50,000 and you settled at $75,000. That's not what the settlement's going to be like, because no matter what we do, our primary requirement under the waiver and as an MCO is to only pay for medically necessary services. So we can't just settle just to settle. We can only settle if some sort of documentation or evidence or testimony has been presented that has convinced a clinician at Smoky with the appropriate expertise that the service is medically necessary. And like it says, you can present new evidence at OAH or in the reconsideration process, and then once that decision comes out, either side can appeal to Superior Court.
At OAH, is there who makes it medically necessary?
At OAH, the decision is made by the administrative law judge.
Who has no medical expertise, right? Or limited?
She does not. I would say that she has developed, there is only one ALJ who hears these. It's Robin Adams Anderson. If she's out, they might have somebody fill in, but she hears 99.9% of these. She's developed a lot of skill and expertise. What I would say she does, her primary role there is to make sure that the clinical coverage policy, the innovations waiver, clinical coverage policy, or whichever policy applies, is being strictly followed. That is what she looks at more than anything else, is the service definition being adhered to? Does the individual meet criteria under the service definition? Because she's really focused on that. But yes, the decisions are made by an administrative law judge, and then they can be appealed. Does that answer your question?
And if they're appealed, they go to?
They're appealed. You can appeal them either into Superior Court of Wayne County or to the Superior Court where jurisdiction arises, which would be your home county. And then from there, they just go through the regular court system. They go all the way up to the Court of Appeals, and they've gone all the way to the Supreme Court on some DMA cases in years past. It's been a long time since that's happened.
That's why we have a waiver in the first place.
That's right. That's right. So, any questions?
So I did,
I think Jesse will come around to all of us.
A couple of years ago with Western, not with Smoky. But
because I do have one, yes.
Okay.
Requesting, a client had 12 hours of community networking a week, and we were requesting an additional 4, and it was denied. And so if you're familiar at all with the service definitions, community networking, how does anybody ever have medical necessity for community networking, for volunteering in the community? So trying to
as a service provider,
what evidence I was going to take that was any different than anything that was in his plan which there was a lot of why he needed to be in the community and how he functioned better when he had community time and all of that. But, I mean, because, we're not talking about counseling for somebody that's depressed. We're talking about services that are relatively difficult to fit into the medical necessity model.
No, I can see that, and what I would say is, again, I think what it comes down to is people looking at the definition of the service in, is it AP? In AP, or at that time probably it was in the technical guide, to look at that definition and seeing if the request meets the criteria of the service definition.
I can see what Tracy is saying, and her question is, which has always been my question, how can this be medically necessary? The service definition is not medically necessary.
Right. I mean, you know.
I think that's part of the challenge of the fact that this is a waiver. So these are, many of the services that are being offered under the waiver are not services that Medicaid typically covers. So you think of like vehicle adaptation or home modification. The goal of the service is not necessarily medical. The goal of the service is home and community integration, so that the person is able to be served in the home and community of their choice. And so I'm not really sure. I don't know that we've had a ton of appeals on any of those types of services.
It goes back to that quote from 1976.
Thank you. It does. I actually, if any of you are interested, I have a whole page of quotes like that. I collect them.
Because that quote was prior to the creation of home and community-based services.
It was.
Yeah, because home and community-based services were created in 1981.
I wonder what he would say about that.
Well, there's a long line of judges who are frustrated with the Social Security Act and with the Medicaid regulations. So it's very challenging to navigate because that one of the fundamental principles of Medicaid is that Medicaid dollars can only be used to pay for medically necessary services. Medicaid is the payer of last resort. How many of you have heard that? And so that's sort of, that underlies everything that we do.
And Tracy, we've got another question in Lenore.
Yes, hi, Mary Short again. So if an individual, if their health and safety isn't met in the 12-hour limit, an adult, and they don't meet the medical criteria for in-home intensive support, and the amount of service that they have been requesting is under the $135,000 limit in the waiver, would an Americans with Disabilities Act request for a reasonable accommodation or a reasonable modification to that policy of a 12-hour limit be possible, and how exactly would the participant do that process?
Sure. So I think as most of you are aware, it was in our News You Can Use last month. Smoky, there was a recent decision out of the Court of Appeals that specifically discussed the applicability of the Americans with Disabilities.
No. Tracy, my question is, how does one request to Smoky an ADA reasonable accommodation? Does it go to Smoky or does it go to... I beg your pardon?
That request would be made through a care coordinator. But again, what I would say is, and and again, you guys are free to make as many requests as you want and to request accommodation under the ADA. It is a very high standard under the ADA. We have gotten some guidance recently on how to look at those. But in general, the one thing to keep in mind is that the innovations waiver is in and of itself an accommodation of the ADA. And so that is kind of, it is already making an accommodation. It is accommodating Medicaid, the Medicaid statute, to allow for these types of services that typically would not be allowed under regular Medicaid. Regular Medicaid would never pay for most of the stuff. You know, there's only, I think, two personal care services are paid under regular Medicaid, and what we call assistive technology and supplies would be paid under durable medical equipment under regular Medicaid. But pretty much everything else is not covered under regular Medicaid because it is essentially already an accommodation of the ADA. Yes, the request should be made through a care coordinator, and Smoky will evaluate it under the criteria that has recently been articulated by the Court of Appeals.
Which has been articulated in thousands of cases, not just the Short v. Smoky.
So any other questions?
Not really news, Tracy.
Okay. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
Yeah.
Okay. Next on the agenda, some announcements regarding B3 services. The provider communication bulletin that will be coming out from Smoky September 1st. We'll be talking about some of the changes that are happening with regard to the B3 services that we offer. The community guide service, we're going to be authorizing it for up to 1 year, 12 units for a 1 year period, so that folks that do not have any services currently but do have Medicaid have access to someone to help them navigate the system in some manner and locate possible resources. We need to start growing the use of our B3 respite service. This service, we actually pay $3.88 a unit or $15.52 an hour for. We pay almost as well for this service as we do personal assistance. It's a better rate than we pay for any of our Innovations respite or our state-funded personal care, which is going away. This service can be accessed through B3 for anyone with Medicaid.
Most of the mental health, most providers have no idea
Yeah.
what this is.
Well, a number of our DD providers know that this exists, and it's...
The cubes will argue with us when we tell them that's there, and they argue and say, you know what you're talking about. So, and maybe the bosses know, but the frontline staff doesn't. We've educated quite a few.
So you're making the statement that we need to do a better job of communicating.
Well, it's the problem. You're communicating the information. It's just the providers aren't telling their staff.
They're not communicating it now.
Yeah.
Hey, Jesse. With the providers, it has to be in their contract to provide that service, and that might be part of the conflict. Each provider has to have that B3 service in their contract to provide it. Mm-hmm. So that might be where the miscommunication is.
And just about every one of our providers that has state-funded respite has the B3 respite in their contract.
It's kind of added automatically.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Well, this information may make respite a little bit more attractive also, so we're going to do year-long out authorizations for it also. And it's not going to require, it's basically going to have like an unmanaged period. So once a person's referred to a provider, they could just submit the request and it's authorized for 12 months.
You don't have to get pre-authorization.
I may be confusing that. You got to get the annual authorization, but it's just one authorization for a full year.
Okay.
Right. And it's going to be simplifying the plan too, so that you can submit just a basic provider plan to request the respite.
Is that the same for the community guide? Or you still have it?
It's the same for the community guide.
We had talked about not pre-approving, but pre-whatever folks, so that we already knew that they were pre-qualifying, that they met the developmental disability rules, all of that kind of stuff, before we sink a whole lot of time and energy into, and is any of that going to happen?
That's actually on the agenda also.
Okay, good.
I mean, let me mention the supported employment piece, because it's a benefit through B3 also. And I just want everyone to know that those are there. Anyone with a developmental disability and Medicaid has access to community guide, respite, and supported employment. And we've just got to do a better job of building the provider network to be prepared for that. The DI that's mentioned on your agenda, that's a whole set. We can offer a set of innovation services to anyone that's moving out of an institution. So we do not have a money follows the person innovation slot, or someone's coming out of J. Iverson Riddle and they're moving into a 6-bed group home. We can utilize DI innovations like services.
Well, we have been seeing, and we'll be given a letter to this effect, that when families are calling and asking for the B3 services from the providers, they're being told you have staff to go with you because we don't have any staff to provide that. So I think if you and your network has got to be prepared that if you're going to change this, that they've got to get some staff hired to provide these services.
You're not the only person we've heard that from. And the change that is also coming with regard to process changes, which I'll go ahead and touch on. And this is something that this group's talked about and other provider groups have shared with us, is that folks will one thing that's been happening in the systems, folks will call Smoky. Smoky gives the person, they'll say they want DD services. We'll give the person contact information with providers, and sometimes they'll connect with a provider, and the provider will do the footwork and make a request, and then there's not enough information for us to authorize the service. Or the provider will make contact with the person and they don't have information that shows that they have an intellectual and developmental disability. Well, starting September 1, all of the requests for DD services will be going through the Registry of Unmet Needs Coordinator. And that person is going to be doing the screenings for everyone. And once she has the documentation that demonstrates an IDD, she will be making referrals to providers that have demonstrated a willingness to work with folks and say that they have staff. So she's going to be doing some front-end care coordination with folks that come into the system. It's actually set up in our in Alpha now that when people contact starting September 1, they'll be scheduled an appointment for Kathy to call them back and complete the screening. And that screening will include the request for them to send in information, because IDD services aren't considered, they're long-term services. There's wait lists for the services. We meet crisis needs based on mental health services. So the IDD services there will be a little bit of turnover time. Like she'll try to stay within 2 weeks of calls, that's our goal. And if she can't maintain that level of return, we may have to look at additional folks for that role. But based on the volume, I think she'll be able to.
Who else is going to be doing that?
Kathy Deals.
Raise your hand, Kathy. Okay.
Yeah, she's in Silva. Overwhelmed with lots of stuff that we keep throwing at her. There's too many Kathys and Christys in my life.
I appreciate that effort.
And Sharon, ain't the dark ones here, not there, Sharon.
Talk briefly.
Oh, that's
That's
funny.
one of the things that on the provider end, we don't have the manpower to do that upfront footwork. And like you said, do all of it, try to request it. We didn't get enough information because we're not trained care coordinators anymore. So if that part's done, then we know that the person is eligible for it and is what they need.
Well, and
more providers are going to step up to do that.
And throw on top of that you can request the community guide for a year after the referral, or you can request the respite for a year. So we're shortening everything down. Well, we haven't made the move to doing requests for state-funded services to be a full year because we don't have as much control over that funding. And it may come in the future that we're able to authorize those for longer periods of time.
How many hours between B3 and state funded?
B3 is, we have a set amount of money that comes out of every service we provide that's dedicated to B3 services. And it's tied to Medicaid and our B3 contract, or our BC contract with DMA. The state-funded services, we're just given a specific amount of money each year, and every year that amount of money seems to dwindle. Are there any questions about those pieces here in Asheville?
How many hours are people getting approved for?
I don't have that off the top of my head. It will be in the utilization review guideline. The respite's somewhere around 30 hours a month.
It's on the website too, on the individuals.
And
down state, Medicaid, adult, child. What's it under?
You would have to go to, I think it's service authorization info provider page.
Okay.
yeah, and there's a level of care grid for IBD. Any questions in Boom or thoughts? How about in Silva? Okay, what about in Lenore?
I think we're good here, Jesse, thanks.
Okay. So I mean, that's something we've talked about, and so some changes are coming, and it will be communicated hopefully September 1 with an effective date of September 15.
Sorry, I didn't have
Okay.
Can you start requesting the 12 months before September 1st, or you have to wait till September the 1st? Oh, it's only next week, so
Yeah, September 1st next week.
So, if we have people that call us that we can't help them because they don't have services yet or whatever, but they do apply, they do seem to have Medicaid or whatever, we already have that number. You gave us a couple meetings back, the lady at the registry of unmet needs. Just give that number to the consumer.
It would be best actually going forward to give the number, the access number, so that they can call Access, and Access will schedule an appointment with Kathy.
Okay, so Access is your first.
Yeah, the number that you would call for any type of service, and Access will be doing the preliminary screening to make sure we have information in the system, like contact address, those kind of things, and then Kathy will be following up. They'll schedule a time for Kathy to call them back.
Gotcha.
that saves her time.
And it also gives us a mechanism for tracking volume and follow-up. It's very similar to what we're doing on the mental health side of things, except we're scheduling appointments internally instead of external. Yeah. Okay.
We're going to do that for all 23 counties.
Yes. It's all going to be initiated through Access, and based on the number of referrals we get, it should be manageable, and if it's not, we'll be looking at different avenues to meet the need. Okay. Smoky is restructuring. So we tend to do this. We're trying to evolve and become a managed care organization to meet the needs of our provider network, to meet the needs of our of the participants in the waiver, of people that are receiving services. And some of the changes are our quality and integrity operations department has been broken into a project management department and quality operations. And then our provider network department has been restructured, and we've hired a new chief executive. His name is Steve Timmons, and he
has historically worked for several different health providers, Cardinal Innovations and Value Options in the past. He will be the chief of the business and marketing. He'll be the chief business and marketing officer. And with the structural changes, I move under him.
Well, then that's not Gary.
And Kathy, David Boyd, and Mike Sink will be working with me in a department that's specific to IDD, and trying to make changes in the network to meet some of the needs that we're regularly talking about. And also with that move, Patty Wilson becomes, she's going to be supervising the provider investigations and provider monitoring. Those two departments are being put together. And so the shift is, it's pretty big internally because it's a change for several people. But it puts, this group will be worked out in some manner. I'll still be very involved with it. We're just not sure how it will be panned out. We'll probably try to make it a bigger piece of CFAC so that it's coordinated in a different manner than just, one person kind of.
What is CFAC?
Community Family Advisory Council.
Committee.
Or committee, thank you.
State
It's Consumer and Family Advisory Committee. God.
What's Mike and David's role?
Scare me.
Or going to be?
They're going to be IDD provider specialists. I'm not sure exactly what their title will be. All these changes occur September 1. Right now they're ancillary business specialists. I'm not sure what their title will be. They're going to be specific to IDD, working with IDD providers in both program development, technical support, trainings and those kind of things, organization of it. So that there's going to be a shift. We're going to try to offer more support to the IDD provider.
Just if you kind of gonna line up with kind of what we talked about, that the providers having to now look at themselves to see if they're going to be able to meet criteria with any definitions and give it themselves 4 years to come up to.
Well, some of that's going to be tied to the home and community-based service standards. Everything that we're doing, and this ties into, we'll just step into waiver updates. The waiver updates will home and community-based service standards, the self-assessment process continues to move forward. We actually do now have an electronic review tool, and reviews will start coming out probably Thursday from Smoky. We have one meeting Wednesday to review to make sure we're evaluating documents in a fair manner in the same. And we have a guide that's 53 pages long about how to review these documents.
These are the site.
These are the
we send
self-assessments that you've been completing.
Yeah, right.
Mm-hmm. Well,
that I'm going to complete.
Well, we actually have received 195 self-assessments from our area, and we still have a lot more to come, and they're all supposed to be in by September 15th.
Are those going to be something that's going to be pretty well private into the fact that if CFAC had to see a provider that did their self-assessment and said they were where they needed to be, is this something that's just going to be internal to you guys, or is it something CFAC can request to see?
We have to present a summary report to DMA, or to DHHS, both DMH and DMA, on January 15th. So at that point, once we put everything together, it would be presented to CFAC and probably this committee too. The information from it, it's really a snapshot of where the system's at as of September 15th. And the entire assessment is an electronic process, so all the data that's gathered goes into a database that will be easy to mine the information. and put together a few reports. When we do the reviews, it's an electronic back and forth with the provider. It's neat how it works once it actually works. We've not done a review that's gone to a provider yet, but as soon as it starts with the providers, the provider will get a link back with our response, and they'll have the items that they need to address at the bottom. They address those and send it back to us. We review it, and it just keeps rolling until everyone's score is fully integrated from the perspective of the assessment document. There's timelines associated with it. The assessments that we complete will have 6 months. The provider will have 6 months to address any missing information or questions that we may have. So to be honest, it's a pretty overwhelming process when you start looking at the numbers, the 14 questions, the detail y'all are having to give us, and then you throw in the mix that we're starting a new waiver on top of that come January 1, which will be changing the whole system with regard to resource allocation, which Tracy touched on that a little bit with regard to individual budgets. The resource allocation model is still being developed. It will create 7 different categories that people will be placed in based on their SIS score, and that will give us budget ranges. You'll have both child ranges and adult ranges, residential and non-residential or living with family ranges, and that will be a guideline for planning. And we'll be doing, we're putting together trainings about resource allocation, which we will do throughout our provider network and with families too.
Can CPAC see or hear what the 14 questions are that you've asked providers, or is that just?
Oh yeah, the 14 questions are posted on the DHHS website.
You can pull down the forms.
Yeah, the forms available at ncdhhs.com//HCDS.
You send that to me, please, and I'll get it received back. Question: If your resource, you said you have child and adult different. What have you done with school age child that's still an adult? Have you thought of that?
Yeah, that's captured in the categories that they create. It sure is. Yeah, because the age used is 16. Not unnecessarily as an adult, but that's the SIS scores will be prior to the age of 16. You will be using the SIS child and the SIS adult.
I know in your allocations, a child that's still going to public schools up to the age of 22 would have different needs than a kid who's 23 or is 21.
And it's captured in that. The way they break it up, it's captured.
It's a crazy question. I probably don't understand it talking about here. But I've always had a problem in listening to Jim, adult, child. But if you have an adult who's 20, 40, 60, that has an IQ of a 3 to 6 month old, how can you label them an adult?
Well, that comes to to chronological age. That's why we label them adults. And then at the same time, you have different system. The system offers different things to people based on their chronological age. Children someone's considered a child up to the age of 21. And then after that, they're considered an adult. The Medicaid system offers more to people that are 21 or less than it does to folks that are 22 and over because of EPSDT, early periodic screening diagnostic testing. Also, children have access to certain community supports that aren't available to adults. The school system is available to anyone under 21, and it's not available to adults. So you have that differentiation, regardless of functional level.
Right, and they have a guardian if they're under the age of 18. you'll have to have that documentation if they're under the age of 18.
Right. Now, we need to hear, I've done a lot of talking here in Asheville. Any thoughts or comments in Boone?
I think you got it pretty well covered.
No other thoughts in Boone? Okay. How about in Lenore?
Yes.
We've got a question here, Jesse.
Hi, Jesse. It's Mary Short. So sort of the same old question. Why is there a limit on sets of services if we're going to a resource allocation? Why would you care if an individual assigned a budget, decided to spend all of that budget on supported employment, and then had natural supports to provide their community living and support? Or why would you care if another individual wanted to spend all of their resource allocation on 18 hours a day of community living and no respite and no community networking? I mean, if we're going to be assigned a budget, what do you care which of the waiver services we spend it on?
Well, the individual budget that will be assigned based on the SIS score, that's just going to be a guideline, and anyone can request an excess of that individual budget. So the department will leave limits on sets of services because of that, because that's not a hard limit in any way. That's the only explanation I can give you, and I'm not sure that that's accurate.
But it is a hard limit. Ask Judge Anderson.
Well, the 135 is a hard limit.
No, the 12 hours is a hard limit. No, the limit on sets of service.
The 84 hours is a hard limit based on the way the waiver is written right now, yes.
But it's written the same way in the proposed waiver, 84 hours.
It does have the 84-hour limit in the proposed waiver on the sets of services.
And I'm just trying to understand, again, why, if we're having this resource allocation, why would a limit on sets of services be included?
Well, because there's no, that resource allocation is not a hard limit in any way.
If there's a 12-hour limit on sets of services and community living and supports at 12 hours adds up to $73,000, but an individual's resource allocation is $94,000 based on their SIS score, why shouldn't they be allowed to use their resource allocation up to $94,000? Why should they be limited to the 12 hours?
Well, that person may not be limited to the 12 hours per day because there are options to exceed the 12 hours a day in the waiver with additional community living and supports.
Temporarily. $90 days.
I can't argue that point.
Okay, just always want to ask, just always trying to get other people in the room to chime in and ask questions. Thanks.
Okay. Thanks, Mary. Let's go to Silva. Any questions there?
I got a comment, Jesse, in regard to what Mary's talking about. When I looked at the division and DMA was bragging about the $130 million they made surplus, that's where these limit issues become a problem, because the budgets they're saying is going to be more flexible, but then they also have hard, concrete limits, and that's very confusing. And it's very processing oriented, because they're making basically a surplus of $130 million off the state Medicaid, and they're putting it in their pocket at the state level. That is part of the problem, I think, as a whole, is I understand what Mary's saying in the fact that, you know, they aren't looking at the needs of the consumer.
No.
They can deny services by saying it's medically necessary, just like the lady said earlier. What is medically necessary? I can say anything's not medically necessary, and I'm not violating the consumer. It's just not medically necessary. And then there's really they have those limits, but those limits, sometimes the needs go beyond those limits to function. And that's the problem with it.
Well, Walter, I appreciate that you categorize that as a comment, because that means I'm not expected to do anything. because it is.
We know you can't, Jesse. You're here, so we're giving you a hard time. It's a lesson in not volunteering.
The last thing on the agenda is the child SIS notice, and Tracy already touched on that. You've already seen one of those child SIS notices. Two scheduled.
They're doing a really good job, I think, at covering, you know, a couple of this reviewers by they're trying to pull it together and make sure that they're filling all those time slots. Apparently, what is wherever they're coming from the AAID?
Yes. No, DDTI.
So they've got like certain time slots and frames. They're trying to get in 3 a day and just get them all done. So.
They have swept in and done this in many states.
Are they going to do adults that have had their SIS done for over 3 years?
It's already started, hasn't it? Yeah.
So like the ones like Jerry that had it done when this thing came and he was in the S600. So now we're going to be looking at.
It'll be time to do another.
I've had one done the second time already.
It's 3 years too, so.
Yeah. So
or you can request it more often.
It's not AAIBD.
Okay.
I understand the reason they're coming in is because you have to have special training to do the child SIS.
Right. The child SIS is a newer instrument, and the DMA contracted with AAIBD so that we get all of the SIS assessments completed prior to implementation of resource allocation in the new waiver.
I have a question on that. With the new service definitions, I guess it's DMA that's doing the listening sections. Just last week, we said in on Wednesday. Again, going back to asking one question about what is going to be the pay rate for these new service definitions, and we were given 4.71 per unit for the new community supported living service, I guess. That's taking in personal care and
community living. Supported living is different.
That piece that then the LME or MCOs are going to make the decision on what the rate's going to be. So this is what Medicaid is saying, correct? And then
what listening station are you referencing?
the one that was just this past Wednesday. It's on, it's either DMA or DA.
Was it a webinar?
It's a webinar, yeah.
Okay.
They're doing like 4 or 5 webinars.
I haven't had the opportunity to listen to the webinar.
Who's doing that?
It's on my YouTube channel.
Because it was scheduled for Friday, and they changed it to Wednesday, didn't give it to
I just haven't watched it.
It's on.
You sent the email out, that was a nice thought.
Yeah, I did say, I didn't know where you see. I tried to watch it 3 times, but I run into privilege issues on my laptop.
Oh.
So once I sit down and watch it at home, I'm okay.
Yeah, good.
And then I send them to my home so that I can watch them.
Who is that? Is Guda?
Deb Goda.
Who's she with?
She's with DMA.
So
Yeah.
they're giving out the rates now for the.
Okay, that's good to know that they've shared those numbers. And I will.
So now y'all can share what you're going to do.
Can I offer some insight on that?
Let me tell you, does this real resource allocation
I'm trying to get interrupted
on
spot.
1/1/16 or with the new plan?
It will begin with the new plan. There's a 2-year phase-in period. according to the proposed document. That may get changed.
Oh, that's been changed.
They said 1/1, that's what DMA said on their race. We asked that question.
1/1/16 is when this service would start. But as far as when people are phased into their individual budget, it would be when their plan came up.
Well, they said it'd be a crosswalk.
Nope.
We would have to crosswalk everyone from
Personal care.
personal care and in-home skill building to community supports and living. And that crosswalk has to happen 1/1/16, or when the waiver goes into effect because of Medicaid rules at the federal level. But as far as the resource allocation piece, that will not be implemented until the person's plan comes up.
But it's going to affect our budgets January 1, right?
It will affect your service budget some on January 1.
Especially it'll affect our plans.
What's that?
It'll affect our provider plans.
Yes.
Because out there before the 1st of January.
That's okay, we can let it go about.
We're very aware of
The
that.
rates are in Appendix J.
Can I ask more?
Yes.
So that's
It's in Appendix J of every waiver.
I read the draft of the waiver.
And it lists the number of individuals receiving a particular service, the rate, whether it's a 15-minute unit, an hour unit, a daily rate, and then the total and then the money is multiplied out.
So I'm going to interrupt for that. I think we ought to do that.
Networking J programs and rights.
Because one of my comments was about Appendix J. It says that there currently are 2,185 users of personal care out of 12,488 recipients. Yeah, liar, liar, pants on fire.
Yeah, they were very verbal about that.
But those are the numbers DMA tells CMS. So if I'm CMS and I go to balance the budget, I'm pissed. This 2188 number, 2185 number of PC users has been the same from when the Innovations waiver was just PBH Cardinal. They never updated it when we went statewide.
The implementation of a new waiver, that's fine,
But the rates are there and they have changed.
The existing waiver until that time. And having done numerous waivers, 2002, 2005, 2008, 2011, 2012, and now this one, I've never seen one start when they said it was going to start. Okay? So we're saying January 1, but we may be looking at March 1. So keep that
it's okay.
in mind. And
I mean,
it's fine if they're saying this, but it doesn't start until then. And we're responsible for enforcing the rules as they are written right now, which means we have to have quarterly progress summary.
Well, I can't imagine there being something that doesn't replace it, because it is a tool that we use. I mean, it's a.
Oh, that's another.
I think we've moved past the website. I missed my opportunity, sorry.
Well, there's another change in the waiver that I've complained about, and that is the waiver document eliminates the level 1 incident reports for backup staffing.
Use some quality of life measures instead of.
And it is contained
You know, what we want
under
is that
participant safeguards currently, level 1 incident backup staffing reports.
now with progress summaries.
So they've eliminated a participant safeguard.
We did those and nobody even looked at them. How much time?
Tell me I'm not passing this information on to people in the federal government. I tried to argue at the state stakeholders meeting on Friday, and I was told that, oh, well, it's an administrative burden. A participant safeguard is an administrative burden for y'all? You need to find new jobs.
It is for us too. We have a waiting list now.
We're going door to door, and when we try to stop, then we get very consistent complaints.
It's pretty sad.
Well, we did too, but you do what you can do. You tell people, I mean,
If you have 50 people in Dayton, you cannot get a door to door.
that's how we are.
There's not enough money.
There's not. And it would take us from 3 in the morning until midnight to do that.
I calculated
Now,
16 hours a day, it's unbillable service, and I'm paying staff, and it comes to
I've got,
$50,000 a year just in staff time.
I understand. We're in the same boat.
and listen, did y'all communicate this in the public
Yeah.
comment?
Yes.
And they have not even.
They didn't even notice
They haven't even
nothing.
responded to anything about that.
Well-
Even the draft, it's still saying that we transport.
Yeah, it still said that in the draft, even though there was discussion about.
Day supports, they're going to be responsible for transportation.
No.
They are now.
Yeah, we really put our
That's
leg out there.
Cindy.
They give us that rating to transport. and
The
they-
discussion at the Raleigh stakeholder group was the day support providers don't understand what the rate would look like if they took transportation.
Heard all I want to hear about that.
They're waiving.
Hey Jesse, I didn't see the webinar, but I saw the PowerPoint from it, the one they were talking about from the other day.
Yeah.
And one thing I noticed on one of the slides, you mentioned this at a previous meeting, because the box was a check for relatives to do AFLs. One of the slides actually stated that community living, sport, whatever the new service is called, that would be the only service that relatives would be able to provide. So does that mean that maybe that wasn't an oversight, or have you received any clarification on that?
I think that would be tied to the definition of relative, which I think is going to be, it's not going to be as broad as we think of it being, based on what I've heard.
Deb Goda said on Thursday in our park listening session or webinar that it could be family members, it just couldn't be parents.
Okay.
For the AFLs.
Okay.
Okay, that's what I thought it would be. Okay, any thoughts on Silva?
Jesse, can you give us information for the DMA sessions before they actually come up? Because I knew about the first one, I went to it, I enjoyed it, got some information, but the second one, I didn't get any kind of information from anybody, so I kind of missed out on that one. But I think that would be nice because, like Eric was talking about, there's some good information. I know that the lady that's the contact, she's the one that sends out emails to everybody when they're coming. You know what I'm talking about? Carrie, how did you get yours? Did you get?
From the council.
We're going to say council.
Yeah, I think it's on the website. If you go to DMA's website.
They have a schedule, don't they?
Waiver,
Nope.
Page. It has them listed there when they are, and then they're putting the recordings there from the ones in the past. You can still go back and do it.
I think I found that from your notification once you go onto their website and start digging around. But are they recorded like you can watch them again, or is it just?
Yes, they're recorded where you can watch them anytime.
Because I thought that I'm looking at the right thing. I tried to start doing.
Right. And I'll resend that information in the distinct link.
Unencrypted.
Unencrypted. I'm getting better at the unencrypt.
Yay.
Believe me. Because I get loaded down with all those that haven't been opened ever so often. And I get lots of requests about not sending unencrypted or sending it unencrypted. So it's really impacted me because I do lots of just general stuff. But I will get it sent out again by the end of this week, the information about the webinars, because they're going to do a total of 5. And we're also going to be putting together one about resource allocation. NC Tide, November 1st through the 4th, is in Greensboro this year instead of in Asheville. And there's going to be a full series about the new waiver. November 1st through the 4th. It's at the Embassy Suites in Greensboro. The conference was moved because of scheduling challenges in Asheville because of the dates, and it's still at the end of our lease season and cost issues. But the actual curriculum, there's a session about resource allocation, a two-part session about all the service definitions, a session regarding HCBS and the next steps, one regarding direct support professionals, and actually Joe Macbeth will be presenting that piece. And then in the afternoon, there's a two-part, of the last day, there's a two-part session about community resiliency training for both staff and folks that work with IDD. So it may be a pretty good
You want
conference.
to comment on other stuff, Ms. Short?
Yeah, just one thing.
Will be offered in November with regard to the new waiver. And I'm sure there will be other things made available.
Jesse, we've got some comments in Lenore, if we can jump in.
Okay.
Hi, Jesse. I was at the 1915C stakeholder group in Raleigh. They're meeting on Friday, August 21st, and I did videotape it and post it to my YouTube site. There are two videos. The first one, they went over, Deb Goda went over the public comments, and so this was an opportunity for that group to respond to the public comments. They received 700 lines of comments. She went over an incredible minimal number. She went over things such as, well, gee, we received a comment about whether self-directed people, whether community guide, community navigators should be self-directed. Oh yeah, and oh, by the way, people commented that we shouldn't change the name of community guide to community navigator. So those were the sorts of public comments that Deb tried to bring to this group. But we did, because members of the public asked questions, we did get around a relative as direct service employee, and one of the things we did get accomplished is the grandfathering for individuals, relatives who are doing more than 56 hours currently. The grandfather lasts for the entire waiver period. So it will be through, what, 18? Because then, because there's only 2 years left on this waiver, and then a new waiver will be written again.
Okay.
But it was pretty sad, the comments that she went over versus what I know people wrote in about. It was really lacking. By the way, I tried to ask about, one of the comments I sent in was about the fact that the level 1 incident reports have been removed from Appendix G, participant safeguards, and Deb Goda explained that that was because it's an administrative burden. So participant safeguards have been eliminated for backup staffing because it's an administrative burden. Also, in regards to rates, they are in the waiver document in Appendix J, the cost neutrality demonstration. You can find the rates listed there. So, there were a number, one of the LME MCOs, not Smoky, believes firmly in relatives as an available and willing workforce and has pleaded for an elimination of a policy at all. It, of course, is falling on deaf ears, but it's not just families who are pleading for the end of the relative policy. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Any other thoughts in Silva? Okay, we'll go to Boone one more time. And actually, you don't get another chance. We'll wrap it up. Thanks for coming tonight. We're going to talk in depth at the next meeting about resource allocation.
Thanks, Jesse. Y'all have a good evening.
It's worth it.
Yes.
I just said have a good evening.
Okay, you too, John. You scared me.
Discussion, I got a comment on it. It kind of goes along with what Mary said about doing away with the incident report. I agree with that. You know, you've been getting incident reports now for, I don't know how many years. But our recent meeting, you know, it was let down that in an 11-month period, there were 8,000 services.
Oh, wait, they were still commenting.
I didn't turn it off.
Oh, okay.
So that would be like me going into Mission Hospital
I think
and
Vernon Silver
not
locked
getting
up.
services for that day because there was nobody there to provide the service. What does one do at a state level or a local level? 8,000 services.
Yep.
That could be 12 hours, 2 hours, 6 hours, whatever, were not provided for the individual. While the incident report may be an administrative burden or whatever, I think enough data has been gathered to see what's going on and what's not going on. But it just blew me away to know that there were 8,000 services that were not provided in an 11-month period.
It's worse than that. It was 12,000 in a 3-month period in Smoky.
I mean, that is a major problem.
As a provider, I have one thing to say with that is that I would say about 99% of the ones that I have submitted, it may be that, you know, they missed a volunteer job that day, or, you know, something to that effect.
Well, it was narrowed down that over half of that over 4,000 was because there were not trained competent people to provide the services.
That specific service. But when that doesn't happen, there's other parts of it that you have to look at, which is like, okay, so the community networking did get provided that day, and there's a section on that backup staffing report that says, okay, how was that time covered? Was the person running the street?
Do you want to shake her hand?
Thanks. At no cost the whole day because the volunteer program was shut down or they had training that day or whatever.
They didn't feel good. They just didn't want to
But yeah, we go for that for free and don't even get paid for it.
But the backup staffing
into
report,
that 4,000.
There
the
it
backup
is.
staffing report is still showing that in those 8,000, 4,000 in those numbers. So I think
Because they don't ask for clarification. They might ask in a little tiny box, but I don't think it's getting filtered down to each when they're breaking it down for
Oh, they broke it down.
for you guys.
They broke it down.
But they're not saying the reasons why these people.
They broke it down.
It's broken down in quite a bit of detail.
Oh, yeah, we were getting step by very detailed that we got in human rehab.
Oh, I don't think I did.
Get that so I can put that in my bag before I don't lose it.
It was broken down.
Well, I can tell you this. I have 2 people that do community networking that I send out to do community networking. Most of my stuff is day supports. I can't pull people from my day supports to cover one person when they're covering 6 people.
Oh, I'm not saying.
I'm just letting you. I'm just letting you know it's a system.
It's something that Smoky or
Thank you so much.
DHS
Yeah.
or somebody needs to look at when you can say in an 11-month period, 80,000 services were not provided. That's
just
my
is this just for Smoky area?
That's all we see is
Yeah, exactly.
That were
Exactly.
What percentage of that?
I don't know. It would be the same thing as you looked at medically necessary. If you went to get any other medically necessary service, and they said, oh, well, sorry, we don't have anyone here today to provide it.
But you have to remember too, is that you've got a really complicated situation at your house. My kid's really complicated. Joe Schmo can't come in and back up for me.
Exactly.
And the agency doesn't have the money to be able to have somebody on standby. So it's a system issue.
That's what I'm saying. That's exactly what I'm saying.
But that's not what it sounded like.
Oh, that's what I'm saying. It's a system issue. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's.
But you've got another option if you've got a medical issue. Like you can go to the emergency room, or you can go to the urgent care. If you've got a medical problem,
You can go
you've
to
got all
multiple
kind of avenues
places.
to
Tell
go.
your primary
But
doctor.
if you've got this situation, the
You have
services
one.
are only limited to one provider.
Because they're the only people with the authorization.
I mean, Dawn may have somebody that she can provide a service for me that
Please, please don't think I'm saying it's a provider. I'm saying it's a universal problem that needs to be addressed.
I see that is a provider problem, but it's not the providers that necessarily sit at the table.
Okay, how would you fix it? That's what I want to know, like, because as providers, I'd love to know.
If we can lower our overhead costs, wow, take off some of that paperwork,
Yeah.
admin costs, we could have a couple of people sitting around.
Just some standby.
Hey.
It sounds like we're going to eliminate backup staff and incident reports
I mean,
and quarterly summaries.
Everybody in my office would get to that attestation.
So by eliminating them and the summaries, then we just will guess.
People are privileged to
Jesse.
provide services. But some programs may not do that.
Hey, Jesse.
Okay.
Jesse.
Not center support.
Yes.
It sounds like it's a hot topic. Could I suggest this be put on the agenda for another meeting? Two of the sites have already logged off.
Wonderful suggestion.
Well,
We don't need to.
yeah, two of the sites have already logged off, and I hate for them to miss the conversation.
It's more than just the reporting issue. It's like, why are we authorizing all these services that aren't utilized?
Right.
Correct.
There you go.
Yeah, sometimes it is. And
I think it varies. When you're dealing with that many people, you cannot have.
so it's on the agenda for the next meeting along with resource allocation.
Good night, folks.
Yes. Thank you all for coming.
Bye. Poor Jesse.